Okay, Chapter 2, the Real Estate License Law and Qualifications. And this is going to be a very important chapter for you to really get into. There's going to be a lot of information that you're going to be tested on. Before I get started into this, we're going to be talking about the Real Estate Commission and 475 in great detail. I want to bring up a concept, though, that has to do with our industry that's a little different. The word caveat emptor. Caveat emptor has always meant let the buyer beware. And in every industry, anytime that a buyer buys something, it's up to the buyer to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the product. Well, in 1985, in a Supreme Court ruling here in the state of Florida, Johnson versus Davis, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that if a seller knows of a latent material defect, that is a defect that's hidden and that has significant value to the property, that seller has to disclose that defect to a potential buyer prior to entering into a contract. So in Florida, what's basically happened is that caveat emptor has been altered, and therefore in Florida we live by a little bit different rules than maybe other states do. So with that said, just keep in mind that we have additional duties to the public for disclosure. Now, as far as the license categories that we have today, honestly, there's only two license categories that we have, and that is a broker license and a sales associate license, one of the two. And either of those licenses have different categories or subcategories under it. When you get your initial license, you'll be automatically and voluntarily inactive. And as far as a broker is concerned, the rules are basically the same. But let me say this, that as a broker, not every broker wants to become an owner of a business or the broker of record for a business. So what a lot of brokers choose to do is to remain as a sales associate working under another broker. Well, the registration process as a sales associate, you're simply going to process your sales associate license, register it with the Division of Real Estate as an active sales associate. That broker that chooses to operate as a sales associate will simply take their broker license and register it with the Division of Real Estate as a broker associate. So a broker associate is not a separate license, it's simply a way that we register. Now, the general licensing provisions, and here they are, you need to be at least 18 years or older. You have to possess a high school diploma or the equivalent of a high school diploma, which is a GED. You have to be honest, trustworthy, and truthful. And one other thing, that you have to disclose certain things to the state when you make application. If you have any criminal background, you have to disclose that. Or if you're currently under scrutiny, in other words, if you're currently in trial or being prosecuted, you need to disclose that as well. They want to know who you are. If you fail to disclose that you have a criminal background, they can revoke your license or they can deny your license. So remember, this is something that you have to disclose. And I'll tell you why they do it. It's that honesty thing. They want you to be upfront about who you really are. The application process. When you decide to make application to the Division of Real Estate or the Department of Business Professional Regulation, the thing is that once they approve your license, that approval is going to be good for 2 years. And let me say this also, that when you finish my course and you take your final examination and you get your end of course report, that end of course report will also be good for 2 years. As far as a Florida residency is concerned, the state of Florida doesn't care what your residency is. You can be a resident of Florida, but you can also be a resident of other states as well. It doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, I recently taught a couple of students from Canada. So a residency requirement is not part of the game. In other words, you don't have to be a resident of Florida or the United States of America. To get a sales associate license, here are the criteria. Besides being 18 years or older and good character, and making sure that your application has been approved, there's going to be a 63-hour pre-license course that you're going to have to take. And at the end of that pre-license course, there's going to be an end-of-course examination. You have to make a score of at least 70% to pass that end-of-course exam. Once you've passed that end-of-course exam, you're going to get an end-of-course report. You need to take that end-of-course report, probably make a couple of copies for yourself. Now, you can either submit that end-of-course report with your application, or if you choose to, you can go ahead and make application ahead of time and simply bring that end-of-course report with you to the testing center. It doesn't matter which one you do. When you're taking the state examination, when you make your application, they're going to notify you when your application has been approved. It typically is going to take somewhere between 2 weeks and a month for the state of Florida to approve you. Once you've gotten notice that you've been approved, then they will schedule you for a testing date. Make sure that you bring that end-of-course report with you to the testing center if you've not already submitted it with your application. Now, the state examination, you're going to have to make a score of at least 75% in order to pass that to obtain your real estate license. And as I mentioned earlier, once you get your license, it's going to be automatically, voluntarily inactive until you go to work for a broker. And they'll file the proper paperwork for you and bring you on board. Once you've obtained your sales associate pre-license, you're going to be required to come in within your initial issue and take a sales associate post-license course. Now, let me explain that. Your initial issue is not for 2 years, more than likely. Your initial issue is going to be somewhere between 18 months and 24 months. And the reason for that is expiration for license are either going to be March 31st or September 30th, depending on when you got your license. And it'll be between that 18-month and 24-month time period. So make sure that you look at your license, make sure what that expiration date is. Now, the rule is this, that you have to complete your post-license education. For sales associates, it's going to be 45 hours. That has to be completed. You have to verify it, and you have to submit a renewal with that verification. If you fail to do this in a timely manner, that is within your renewal period, your license will automatically become null and void. Therefore, your license is gone, and if you want to practice, you have to start all over. As far as a broker license, here are the requirements for a broker license. It's several prongs to this because there's several ways that you can do it. The most common, that to become a broker, that you have to have been licensed as a sales associate for at least 24 months out of the past 5 years. Once you've done that, you qualify to become a broker. Now, you don't have to serve in the state of Florida as a sales associate. You can serve in any state 24 months out of the last 5 years to become a broker. Now, here's also the catch to that. That 24 months does not have to be concurrent. It can be broken up. You can be licensed for a year, set out, and then be licensed for a year. As long as it's within 5 years that you've been active for 24 months, you're going to qualify. So getting your broker license has some qualifications. You can also get a broker license if you're already a broker in another state that we have mutual recognition with. And all you do is simply apply for mutual recognition for that broker's license. And let me also back up and say that mutual recognition also works the same for sales associates. That if you're a sales associate in another state that we have mutual recognition with, you can come directly to Florida and obtain a sales associate's license without that pre-license education by simply taking an examination. I'll talk more about the mutual recognition in just a minute. As far as the broker's expiration, it applies the same as sales. Your license will expire either March 31st or September 30th. depending on when you got your license. Now for brokers, you're going to have 60 hours of post-license. And that post-license has to be done through your initial issue. If you fail to get your post-license during your initial issue, your broker license will become null and void. Now let me go to mutual recognition and make sure we understand this. Our textbook has a number of states. This is a moving target. I'm sure that these states have changed a little bit. The best thing to do is to go to myfloridalicense.com and look up applications for license and look up mutual recognition. And it will give you the current states in which we apply mutual recognition to. Mutual recognition is simple. We've contracted with a number of states, and what we've basically said is that we will allow your agents to get a license in the state of Florida identical to yours if they will take a 40-question exam on real estate license law in Florida. It's not a big deal. But the catch is, in mutual recognition, they cannot have become a resident of Florida first. In other words, their residency needs to be in that mutual recognition state. If they move to Florida first and make application for mutual recognition, they no longer qualify for mutual recognition, and they have to get the license the old-fashioned way, taking the 63-hour pre-license course, taking an end-of-course exam, and taking a 100-question state examination, passing it with a score of 75%. Remember that there's a difference between a license and a registration. A license simply is a privilege to do something, a privilege to practice real estate. Registration is simply taking that license and placing it on public record. Remember I mentioned the broker license? When you get your broker license, you'll be basically voluntarily inactive. Now you can register with the Division of Real Estate as either an active broker, where you're the broker of your own company, or you can register it and say that I want to be a sales associate working under somebody else, and you'll become a registered broker associate. So we have options when we register our license with the state of Florida. Once you've cycled through your post-license education, whether sales or broker, doesn't matter, from that point forward, you'll be taking continuing education. Continuing education and post-license are not the same thing. They function differently. If you fail to get your post-license in a timely manner, your license becomes null and void. But with continuing education, it's first 14 hours that needs to be done within your licensing period. But if you fail to do that, your license does not automatically become null and void. And I'm going to go over that with you in a minute or two. But every 2 years after you cycle through your initial issue and your post-license, you'll have continuing education to do from now on. Now, both brokers and sales can take the same continuing education class. Services of real estate. The services of real estate, where you have to have a license: appraising, buying, advertising, renting, selling, auctioning, leasing, and exchanging. If you do any of these in the state of Florida, you've got to have a license. A bar sale is the acronym. Now, who has to have a license? Anyone that performs any of those services of real estate here in the state of Florida, and for somebody else, and for compensation. That compensation can also be the mere expectation of being compensated. Now, if one of those four things are missing, no license is required. For instance, if I'm selling my own house and I'm not selling it for somebody else, I don't need a license to sell my own house. Or if I'm not being paid a commission or compensation for that, I don't need a license. With every license, there's going to be some exemptions. And let me say, the easiest way to remember the exemptions, typically speaking, is going to be a salaried individual working for someone who is not licensed. In other words, their employer is a good way to remember that. In other words, a salaried manager of a condominium, a salaried manager of an apartment complex. And these, again, are salary only. And when you're looking at working for developers, typically speaking, an individual that is a salaried sales associate working for an unlicensed developer doesn't require a real estate license. Individuals that are court appointed by Judge Judy or Judge Wapner, they don't need a real estate license. But let me say this about the developer. Developers can also hire sales associates that are licensed. Now here's the catch. If you've got an unlicensed developer that doesn't have a real estate company within its company, they can hire sales associates, but they cannot pay them on a transaction basis. They have to pay them a salary. Nobody has to register with the DBPR. If that unlicensed employer, however, hires a sales associate or a broker associate, that sales associate or broker associate's license has to tag with the DBPR somehow. Therefore, that unlicensed employer has to register with the Division of Real Estate as an unlicensed employer in order for that license to be properly tracked. Television, radio announcers, hotel, motel clerks, none of these folks have to have a license. And I think that's all we're going to have for Chapter 2. So what I'd like to do right now, I'd like to go ahead and move on into the review of Chapter 2. Chapter 2, Review, License Law and Qualifications. The mortgage business is a separate industry from real estate. All applications are submitted to the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. The initial license period is for 18 months to 24 months. Remember, it's going to expire either March 31st or September 30th. Mutual recognition only applies to applicants who do not reside in the state of Florida. Failure to complete the post-license requirements in a timely manner, the license will become null and void. A license is required if you perform any service of real estate in the state of Florida for another person and for compensation or the mere expectation of being compensated. And that's the end of our Chapter 2 review.